Okay, we are now going to get started. And speaking of number one, even heroes, and I mentioned this, so one more time, Scott. We had to shuffle around the agenda a couple weeks ago, and I had to put Scott on another day. And he was out one day, and so I'm furiously sending emails to him, and he comes back, he emails me, sure, I'll do that. So helpful. So thank you very much. Scott Nelson's spoken before. He's a great presenter. He is the Region 2 Access Management Engineer. So Scott, take it away.
I don't have any money, so I'm not going to be able to match Jeff. Sorry. I know that's all what you guys are really appreciative about. But hey, we got access management this morning, so good times. A little bit about myself. I have been with ODOT for a little over 10 years. My background has been working with the project letting department. I have worked in regional roadway. I've worked in the statewide roadway group doing some ADA standards work. And most of my time has been in access management and development review. When I recruit people to my crew, often people will give a little laugh or a cringe when I say access management, but it's really kind of similar to your guys' work, where I get to deal with a lot of different disciplines. I get to work with maintenance, I get to work with projects, I get to work with local agencies, and it's pretty exciting for me. It keeps me busy, and it keeps me having a diverse project range. So I can definitely appreciate the challenges you guys have, being aware of all of the different things that come up. And today we'll talk a little bit about access management, and I'll try to help a little bit of understanding of how we do access management and what our responsibilities are. So first thing of access management, what's the intent? Why are we doing it? Access management, I think most of you guys kind of get it, that access management's really about safety on the highway. We're wanting to regulate access points, and we're doing this so that we can minimize conflicts. We're doing this so we can maximize spacing from more conflicted areas, more congested areas. Some of our signalized areas, we're doing this so we can make sure we have adequate sight distance at approaches that are entering the highway. And sometimes we're looking at, mitigating heavy traffic, so adding channelized turn lanes, adding lane signals. Those things are, I think, kind of obvious. The other side of it that has really come to play a little more just in the last 10 years or so is the private property's interest side of it, so the economic development side of it. Many of our highways double as a main street for a community, urban or rural community, and it's kind of the lifeline to the businesses there and the people there. So we have this balancing act of what is, how can we meet this kind of medium where we're serving our needs, we're reducing risk, but we're also serving the needs of the public, and they're getting, they're able to have their communities thrive, their businesses thrive, and continue to support development. Of course, a big difference in this is what is the traffic characteristics. So we're not going to go treat everybody the same. If we're in a 25 mile an hour STA on a low ADT highway, we're going to have more flexibility with local access. If we're on a high-speed expressway dealing with heavy traffic, that's going to kind of weight those scales, so to speak, where our risk is higher. We're going to come in with a little more, perhaps a little less flexibility on what we can allow, and really push that safety improvement agenda. So if that's the why, here's the how. Most of our access management happens through the district office, through permitting. This is really the appropriate time for us to work with property owners. They're coming and asking us to do something. They're usually wanting to do some sort of change. We've got the locals land use process on our side to help push for addressing issues that are there today. And it's kind of an agreement situation where we can identify concerns, they can identify their needs, and hopefully we can work to move in the direction of our standards, move in the direction of a safer highway, and address if there's additional traffic there developing, we can address that as well. The next most common type of access management is when we get into your guys' world. The most common time you guys will deal with this is not going out there and trying to really make a big access management change. What you'll find is most of the time it's more around something else that's in the project scope, a need of the project, say a maintenance of the highway, resurfacing of the highway. Triggers curb ramps. Curb ramps could get into highway or to private accesses. You now having to do access management to adjust somebody's access. Another big one would be widening of the highway. Bridge replacements. Bridge replacements almost always mean raising the road up. You're going to have to chase that grade down. You're going to end up doing some access management, just adjusting people's access to accommodate the need of the project. The less common access management that you guys will do is when we actually go out and we try to close accesses for safety reasons. In my experience, this typically is tied to a plan that's been developed. You could have a safety plan, you could have a corridor plan, interchange area management plan, refinement plan, but something that has said, this is an ongoing problem, we need to address it. Went through a document that got adoption from the locals, got adoption from ODOT. Now we've got some money, we're going to go through and start to implement it. It's usually contentious. People aren't happy when they're losing their highway access. It often involves frontage roads, connection roads. You're trying to provide them connectivity off system. So that's one that you'll see less of, but when you do, our process is obviously going to be a little bit tricky with the private property owners. So I realize that the conference here is kind of around this new stage gate. Access management really didn't change a lot with the new life cycle, but we have had enough changes in the last 5 years that I still think it's valuable to talk about our process. And as you can see, we're highlighted all there down pre-DAP. Makes it pretty tough. We've got to go out and try to get an agreement and go through a process prior to DAP. The reason we do that is oftentimes our decisions need to be made before right-of-way goes in and starts working on their appraisals. So if we have some sort of modification or closure, they want that agreed upon prior to them working through their appraisal process, their offer process, even their description process. The challenge is, of course, that means that we're starting our process very early. We often are looking at a two-dimensional concept plan. We might not have three-dimensional grades yet, so we're having to guess a little bit at some of the vertical impacts that are going to have to happen to the properties. We might be having to guess a little bit about if widening is going to have to happen, right-of-way widening, acquisitions. So it's important to identify it early and get started and you're going to have to make some assumptions fairly early, and then you're going to have to try to refine that more toward the end. Our process typically takes around 6 months. Bigger projects can be a little longer than that. Shorter projects, you might be able, we're only dealing with 1 or 2 properties, you might be able to scale a month or so off of that back. But there's a lot of prescribed timelines that property owners have. You really can't forego those. So we need to get out there, we need to get our notices out, we need to start our timelines, be able to get, hopefully, get a decision, get through our appeal period, and let you guys move on, right away move on, and finish your design. So some of the rules that we operate by and guidelines, I'll give you a little bit of background. Oregon started their first access management rule back in 1951. And it was pretty slim. It basically just said that you had to have written permission to have an access on the highway. And that applied to both public and private approaches. Problem was, we weren't very good at really policing that. And there's probably quite a few reasons. Some of it just lack of coordination with local agencies, lack of getting notice when somebody was doing something, lack of property owners thinking, even knowing that they had to come to us and get permission. You get a lot of farmers just go out there and they're going to build an access road. We also struggled a little bit with our own projects. We would go out, we would build highway approaches, we would define them. We would not issue permits, though. We wouldn't take the last step and actually document that we intended to do that. So it's a problem we still struggle with today. We really had a good 50 years of pretty scattered record taking and coordination with property owners. We'll see things where we had written communication with the property owner, but we never wrote a permit. So that, of course, is problematic in a few different ways. Our first, draft of Division 51, Oregon Administrative Rule that sets out a pretty prescribed access management process, came in around 2000. So at this point, we're starting to try harder. We're working better with our locals. We've got our first access management permitting software. CHAMPS is still around. It's about ready to go away. But this is when CHAMPS came out in 2000. That first draft of Division 51 was pretty strict, though. It was pretty regulatory. It was often hard to get to yes with people. They would come in, they'd want to do something, and we would tell them, not only can you not do what you want, we can't even issue permits for what you've had for 40 years. We never had a permit on it. You can't get to yes through the rule. As you can imagine, we had some pretty ticked off property owners. And same thing with projects. If you didn't have a permit, project came through, project could basically do what they wanted. And oftentimes we did. And that, we got a lot of pushback on that. There was, of course, some nasty fights, and eventually the recession hit in 2010, and we had enough politicians that said, we're gonna go out and we're gonna change ODOT's access management rules. So that's where we're at now. We had 3 Senate bills in 2011, 2012, 2013. They all resulted in some pretty big changes in our rule. For your guys' world, probably the biggest change is all of those approaches that have been around forever got kind of like a grandfathered status. They call it presumed to be permitted. There's some scenarios it doesn't apply to, but the majority of them out there that have been around since 2000 are now all in a permitted status. What that means to you guys is now all of these people have appeal rights whenever you want to go modify their approach. So before we had flexibility, maybe too much flexibility, because sometimes we wouldn't really do the outreach we should have done, to go now we still have the flexibility, but there's a lot of process that has to be done to be able to go out there and close and modify something that has a permitted right. We'll touch on that a little bit, but the other thing that was changed in the last revision of the rule was the inclusion of the methodology. Methodology is an internal process in our process. The whole process is called the access management strategy. We'll get on that here in the next slides coming up. But the methodology has now been added where it is an opportunity for affected property owners to weigh in on the decision criteria that we're going to use through the project. So what we want to do is we want to send them out something and we want to say, hey, we've got a project coming through. There's possibility that there could be some access modifications or closures, and here's the decision criteria that we're going to apply to this project. You have to kind of have an idea to set those up right, knowing what you want to do. I mean, if you're going to raise the road up for a bridge, you want to say, we're going to have to adjust driveways to accommodate the vertical change. If you are just doing resurfacing, but you're going to be doing a lot of curb ramps, you want to address in your decision criteria that we're going to adjust approaches to allow for pedestrian connections to crosswalks. So we'll get into a little more, but that was something all new that came out in 2014 was when the new rule was adopted. PDO3 was done right about that same time. It attempted to try to establish our new process. Since we've done it for about 5 years now, we've realized that there's some guidance in there that's doesn't really work. So we have it on the to-do list to go through and update, kind of a process standard. It probably will live in a manual or a tech bulletin. It won't be a PD directive. The biggest missing piece we have right now is we don't have a definition of what a modification is. There's some guidelines in PDO3, they're not good. They will miss things that are obvious modifications, and they'll have you include things that really probably aren't a modification. I mean, if we're paving an inch onto somebody's property just to tie in a rural driveway, is that really a modification? Not something that we want to really have to go through our process. So I've been working with the roadway managers. We're trying to get something that we can support. There's a little bit of fear because we do want to have some hard lines on what a modification is, but we're also in the pre-DAP level. So, are we really going to know exactly what a vertical change is going to be at the time? We're trying to get there. It's a struggle that you guys have to know is probably going to be there for a while, where you're looking at something and you're trying to make a decision as a team. Do we want to call this a modification? Is it really going to change the way they're operating? So at this point, I just try to use judgment and work with your team. So before we get a little more into the access management strategy, which is our process, I wanted to highlight some keys to remember. So we've been challenged in court quite a few times, either us or local agencies, on our ability to do access management. And the courts have pretty consistently backed us up to do that. We have the ability to go out there, and we have the ability to do what we need to do to make sure our facilities are operating the way they need to operate. But what you need to remember is the courts don't like it when we don't follow our own process. So we've got this administrative rule, this is our process. If we don't follow it accurately and we get into a condemnation court hearing, or somebody tries to come after us for damages, ODOT's going to look really bad, and the judges really like to kind of pound on us if we didn't follow our process and try to treat everybody consistently. So that's something else that I think is a big key to remember, is we've got this process. If we follow it right, we've got the ability to do what we need to do. If we don't follow it right, we try to scramble at the end, we're really putting a lot of risk out there on ourselves. And the risk is court cases and precedents through court cases, and of course the court of public, kind of scrutiny and getting in the paper and, not treating somebody right in the eyes of the public. Last one I've got touched on here is all of our STIP projects need to have some sort of access management documentation. We've heard, this is something I think with the new people coming in where there was maybe some misinformation that got passed down. I heard a couple of years ago that, consultant projects don't need access management. Their consultants are doing it. So make sure that all STIP projects have some sort of access management documentation. If it's just a no-brainer and you're going out there doing signs, you're not touching anything but redoing signs, we just need an exemption memo. You can contact your region access management engineer, or if you're in Region 1 or Region 2, you've got a coordinator for that. Contact them, let them know the project, give them information if they want to look at it a little bit more, and they can provide an exemption memo for you that says, this project's exempt from the process. But at a minimum, we need that. So the first step of the access management strategy team the first step is to get your access management strategy team. So at this point, you've kicked off. Your design team, your roadway designer, somebody's going, it looks like there's a decent chance we're going to have to make some access changes out here. Might be minor, they might be pretty big. But you think that this strategy process is probably going to be triggered. This is your group. You've got you guys in this room here, the transportation project manager. You've got your representation from access management. If you're in regions 3, 4, or 5, that's your RAMI. If you're in 1 or 2, you've got your access management project coordinator. You've got your right-of-way agent. This is important. Make sure to keep your right-of-way involved in this process. And you've got your roadway designer. District permit specialists are typically invited, but oftentimes they really aren't an active part of the team. The district does have the permitting authority. The district managers assign them, so we want to keep them involved. But at least in Region 2, most of the permit specialists are kind of like, just tell us what to do after you guys have gotten an agreement and when the project's going going on, or ask us if you need to pull research. They've got hard files that they'll go and do some permit research for you on. But they're not really, I wouldn't say they're one of the 4 core members of the team. So I mentioned before, we need to start typically about 6 months before. If the project's really big, you probably want to start before that. Affected property owners are going to receive 3 notice letters. The first one is this methodology we talked about. Methodology actually has appeal rights. Somebody can come in and say, this isn't what I want. I've got big concerns. You're going to miss something that I need. And they can actually come in and have a collaborative discussion with the region manager, or push it to a dispute review board. We haven't really gotten there yet. Usually somebody calls in, we might make some changes, but most of the time they want to talk specifically about their property, and we're telling them that it's not the right time. Look at the language, see if the language satisfies what you need. Once we get past this step, we're going to meet with you and talk about the specifics on your property. So if we make it through that methodology review period, it's a 21-day period where we send certified letters of the methodology. Oftentimes people will contact you, but most of the time you can kind of satisfy them, explaining the process and explaining that they're going to have more opportunity to interact in the decisions if their access is going to be affected. You've moved on past that point. Your methodology is finalized. Now you're going to send out a notice of possible impact on property. So at this point, your design's starting to come together, and you're going, okay, definitely looks like we're hitting this guy, this guy, this guy, this guy. You're going to send out a letter, and you're going to hope to meet with them and discuss the impacts. See what their design vehicle is, see if they've got any unique aspects of their property or their business. They might have a delivery truck or something, or you'll often hear things you wouldn't have think of when you go out and meet with property owners. You'll also get quite a few people that just won't respond. They don't want to worry about the project, and I guess that's their prerogative. You send them the notice, you try to reach out to them. If they're not going to respond, you continue to move through your process. The last letter there is our actual decision letter. So this is the approach closure or modification notice. You guys might have heard the term red letter before. These are your red letters. The red letter process is kind of obsolete at this point. For a while, we were tying our normal public outreach into the access management notice process. And we had this green, yellow, red letter kind of set up. It's not really applicable anymore now that we have the methodology. But if you hear the term red letter, that's what we're talking about. So this is the decision letter. We went through it. We've tried to do some outreach with them. We've got to a point to our design where we're confident in our decision, and we have finished up our strategy to the point where we've said this is what we're going to do to these approaches. We're going to send them that letter. It's going to define what our action is, and they'll have another appeal right. There are a few times they won't have appeal rights. You guys really don't need to worry about that. That might be if there was access rights involved, or maybe there was direction in the past. We told them to close something and they didn't close it. But if it's a permitted approach, they're going to have an appeal right, or presumed to be permitted approach. It's another 21-day process. They once again have a right to come in and have a collaborative discussion with the region manager. They have a next step, which is a dispute review board, and then they have a final step of a contested case hearing. I haven't been there yet. I hope not to ever get there, but it sounds like it's kind of a mediator-led quasi-judicial process. The other parts of our strategy, so I guess the whole parts would be the official project access list. This is going to have basically all of our historical information on here, access control research, permit research, ties to right-of-way map stations, project stations, and eventually it's going to have those action items that we decide on the end. And that'll be something that gets finalized, passed on to the district manager, and kind of as here's what you do when the project actually goes to construction. The methodology and the narrative, and the letters are all part of this access management strategy. Narrative is just kind of some background, gives some safety information, some corridor characteristics, and eventually it'll include those action items. So lessons learned, we've got kind of through my last 5 or 6 years working on this. It can take a lot of effort sometimes, and it's hard to really predict which ones are going to take a lot of effort. You might think something is a pretty minor change to somebody. They might think it's the end of the world. You really don't know until you get out there and you start talking to somebody. You always want to try to give yourself lots of opportunity. You want to work with these people enough, or as much as you can, because it really is going to help right away go through, get their negotiations done. It's going to help construction when they get out there, if you've went through all of these concerns and worries that these property owners are having. We do see attorneys sometimes hired right off the bat. Doesn't necessarily mean it's a bad thing. Somebody might just be worried that they want to, they have an opportunity here, they see the appeal rights, they want to make sure they're not giving away an opportunity and that an attorney is helping them through there. The one thing I would say, if an attorney is involved, it's probably best to contact DOJ, let them know that you're going to be having some interaction with an attorney. It's never a bad idea to have them there if you're in a meeting with the attorney as well. And you're going to want to watch your documentation a little closer and your letters a little closer. Attorneys like to find errors in our letters and push it back on us on like, oh, you guys screwed up here. You need to kick it back to a different spot. I think it makes them feel like they're earning their money if they can get a leg up on us and say, well, you had the wrong mile point in this letter, so I don't even know if this is applicable anymore. You need to go back in the process. So make sure to really review your stuff closely if an attorney is involved, because they will pull the I gotchas. Once again, we could have multiple meetings out there. If we've got somebody that's pretty concerned about that, you get a gas station involved, you're probably going to have to go out there and watch how his delivery trucks come in. All sorts of scenarios you wouldn't think of where people want to come out and go, well, look at my RV when it pulls in. It's not going to be able to do anymore. I want you to come out and set up some cones and see how I'm going to be able to get in after your guys' project. If we do get into an appeal situation, so somebody's asked for a collaborative discussion, they're nervous about the impacts, they don't feel that their needs are getting met, at that point, you'll probably have the region manager involved. I think all regions might do it a little bit different. I know we always involve our region manager. Area managers need to be up to date, as well as the district manager, since they're the permitting authority. So you want to let management know that you're likely heading into an appeal process. Some other things I wrote down here that aren't on the slide, kind of the keys to remember. So you guys have a project scope, and it's important to really remember what your project scope is when you're getting into these access management decisions. If your scope is to go out there and resurface the road, and you see an approach and it's 45, 50 feet, you're like, God, that's really unnecessary. We should make that 30 feet. That's really not the intent of the project, to go out there and tackle these battles. The project is really to resurface the road, and you might get into some access with ADA ramps, but scope creep can happen in access management too. If we're out there trying to fix safety problems, absolutely, we're going to go out there and we're going to try to make some decisions about improving access. But if that's not the scope of the project, keep it what it's intended to be. The next one I would hit on is, you've got these key members of your team. Make sure when you're out making decisions and negotiating with property owners, that all members of those teams are there. It's happened to us a few times where some negotiations have been made and agreements been met, and right-of-way wasn't involved, and they're like, oh, well, I don't know how I'm going to be able to do what you said you were going to do for them. Something to make sure to keep those guys involved. I mentioned a little bit about the vertical challenges. Make sure to think about vertical grades. Some of the nastiest fights we've had were things that we didn't really realize until we realized the road needed to come up higher than we thought. Pushes back onto people's property and leads to all sorts of impacts that you might not have thought in your first blush through the project. I think I wrote one more down here. Let me check. Oh, last one's kind of a recent one. So defining open frontage. Defining open frontage is really tough. Region 1's battling it right now with Outer Powell. We've had to battle it down in Yachats. You've got these scenarios where parking is kind of using a combination of private property and public property. You want to go put curb and walk in there and define it, and there really isn't an easy way to not screw up their access pretty hard. Or I shouldn't say their access, their parking and their on-site circulation. We're trying to better define how to do that and working through the Outer Powell problem, but you just know if you've got open frontage and you want to go define it, you could deal with some pretty upset property owners. So I'm about out of time. I don't know if you want me to take questions or just...
We have time for one question. Does anyone have a question? Even though, oh, excellent. Jason, right? Josh, sorry.
This might be a silly question, but is the access management strategy and exemption letter only applicable to ODOT facilities? What if we're making access changes on a local system?
It is only applicable to ODOT facilities. What we'll find though is sometimes we have a strategy because we're affecting highway approaches, but we're also going up some local facilities and affecting approaches as well. We typically try to give them the same rights that we're giving the highway approach property owners at that time. If your impacts are all off system, there is no highway approaches, I wouldn't recommend doing a strategy. At that point, it's really up to the local agency. It's still good to go out and meet with these people, try to give them an opportunity to engage in the process, but there isn't anything that says we have to give them that process, and it's a lot of work. And I probably wouldn't recommend it the majority of the time.
Okay, Scott, thank you so much.
You bet.
Really appreciate it. Let's give him a hand.